Looks like we're live
Yeah.
now.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Don't know what happened.
All right, we are live again for the first time. Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties, and this is like how many of these have we done? 6, 7, 8?
Something like that.
I don't know. We've done several of these, and this is the first real glitch or technical problem that we've had.
Well,
but-
we had some small ones, but
Yeah,
this is the
little
first time
things.
we haven't had trouble being on the air.
Yeah, but
So.
we're here a little later than we would have liked, but today we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and so should we give them a couple minutes for people to catch up with us?
Probably.
Yeah, I kind of like Back to the Future or what movies
Yeah,
kind of
Groundhog Day.
Yes, Groundhog
Yeah,
Day.
we're gonna. Yeah, but at the first stream, I had this whole thing about how it was noon, and so I couldn't say good
Well,
afternoon
maybe there's a reason that didn't make it.
because it wasn't good. It just wasn't good. It was boring. Y'all, it would have been like, "Wah." But it's 12:09 right now, and so yeah, Ralph, you're right. Digital technology will get us all the time, but it's 12:09, so it is afternoon. So maybe now it is appropriate to say good afternoon, but we're glad that you're with us, Ralph, and anybody else who catches up with us and watches this later. Today we're going to talk about 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and this is a passage where Paul talks about defending his ministry, and this is at least the third time where the theme of Paul defending his ministry comes up, and we're kind of, it's interesting to us that we've hit it on a Wednesday so many times, but I think it tells us something that this is the theme that Paul is going to again and again and again, and that people who are doing ministry are going to come under attack. As we do things in this world, we will get attacked. The people say the only way that you're really going to be safe from criticism is to do nothing, and Paul was obviously not doing nothing, and that double negative is proof positive that Paul was busy doing the gospel and doing ministry, and because of that there were people who would criticize him, and so people criticized him and he would defend himself about it. And so I think as we get some criticism, we can defend ourselves, and I think probably take note of the way that Paul does it here. And so these first few verses, Brandon is going to read them for us again. Yeah, first, give us those first 6
Cool.
again.
Now I, Paul, make a personal appeal to you by the gentleness and graciousness of Christ. I, who am humble among you in person, but bold towards you when absent. I beg you that when I am present, I will not need to be bold with the confidence by which I plan to challenge certain people who think we are walking in a fleshly way. For although we are walking in the flesh, we do not wage war in a fleshly way, since the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but are powerful through God for the demolition of strongholds. We demolish arguments and every high-minded thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, and we are ready to punish any disobedience once your obedience is complete.
All right. So let's see if we can remember what we said the first time.
Taking thoughts captive.
Yeah, so we spent some time there talking about taking thoughts captive. He talks about taking thoughts captive, and it brings to mind a battlefield, right? And what we had said was,
Well, he talked about waging war, and he's talking about weapons
Yeah.
in the passage too. So it is like warfare.
Yeah.
that he's talking about.
it's warfare. And so this idea of taking thoughts captive, I thought it was awesome because in the last decade or two, the advent of the internet and technology, we've had so much discussion about how people today are bombarded with images and thoughts and ideas like never before. But ultimately, our battlefield isn't the internet. Our battlefield isn't social media. It isn't TikTok. That's not our battlefield. Our battlefield is in our own minds. And it's these thoughts that we have to take captive. It's, and it's always been that way. Whatever media or opportunities are out there, ultimately probably our biggest enemy is ourselves. So, what else stands out from you
This
there?
little part, once your obedience is complete, what is that
Okay, yeah.
referring to?
So that's
Is he talking about our making the decision to follow Christ? Does that complete the obedience?
That's what I figured, but
Once you become a Christian,
Yeah.
then he's going to, if you
Yeah.
behave a certain way, he's going to bring that to light. So
Right, and I think that's the point that he's making here, and I get hung up in this idea about punish every disobedience, and if this is one of those passages that if you just take that out of the context, you could be like, I'm going to punish every disobedience, and that would be a horrible way to live. Like, if you had to live under that sort of rule where your parents punished every single disobedience, man, that would be tough. And I don't know that it would make you a good person. I think it would just make you dishonest and make you sneaky, because you would just work harder at not getting caught than you would of being holy. So I think what he's pointing towards is sanctification, right? And that's, once your sort of the initial obedience is complete, then you kind of work on those other things. So, I mean, you guys have worked with youth and young people. How many times have you heard people say, like, I'm not good enough to go to church, or church is for people that are, kind of have their lives together, And that's not what we've actually seen. What we see instead is that people who don't have their lives together, they come to church, they get right with Christ, and then all of those other things kind of line up, right? So, what else stands out to you there, Brandon, or Rusty, or Brad?
well, I think it's the fact that he is talking about warfare. We tend to not react, I think, when we hear things that are ungodly or things that are contradicting our faith. We have a lot of other thoughts in the arena of our minds that are being propagated, atheism just as an example, and some other, and we just don't seem to be as willing to wage war against those things and really speak against them.
Yeah.
And he was ready to do that. And I thought I had when he said ready to punish every disobedience. Well, you can't really have grace or mercy on someone unless you have the ability to punish them too.
Right.
So
Yeah, because if you don't have that authority, then
just
it's
because
not
he's
mercy
ready
or
to
grace.
punish doesn't mean that's what he's going to do.
Yeah.
It also gives him an opportunity to have mercy and grace.
Yeah.
So
Oh, it's a line in a movie, and I can't remember what movie it was, but I remember a character one time saying, "Don't mistake my mercy for weakness."
yeah,
And that's, we don't want to do that with God. Just because he hasn't punished you doesn't mean he can't. I think maybe the thing that really stands out to me, I feel like in this passage, Paul reminds me of a rapper, because he's kind of talking about himself in some aggrandizing ways, and about how he's going to punish, and these kind of things. That I think maybe the one that really stands out to me is when he talks about, I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away. And that is not the picture that we normally think of with like macho men, right? Like, I remember being at the ballpark once and hearing somebody start a confrontation with another guy, and he was like, "I've heard what you've been saying about me. Let's see if you're man enough to say it now," right? And he's like, are you gonna say that to my face? And Paul is like saying, like, I'm not gonna say things to your face. I'm saying these things away from you. And he's like saying, but I'm not doing this out of some sort of cowardice, but I'm being bold when I'm away from you, so that when I come to you, I don't have to be bold, but I can be humble in your presence. So I can speak kindly to you when I'm there with you. But he's like, so I may not have to show boldness with such confidence. And so it's just an interesting idea to me that he's like, in writing the letter, he's being bold so that he can be humble later. And it makes me wonder, because we've all been through kind of confrontations where people will come to us angry. This may have even happened recently, and somebody will come angry and they'll be like, I'm upset about this. And then later they feel bad about it. And they're like, I probably shouldn't have been so bold initially. I think there's just really great value in the example Paul sets here to say, I'm going to write you a letter where I'm laying all of this out, and maybe in this letter I'm going to come off as a jerk, or maybe I'm going to come off as too bold or overstepping, but I'm doing this so that we can kind of work all this out now, so that later when we're face to face we don't have conflict. That's, I think, a much better way than to say, let's get face to face and just, let's come to blows. So anyway, Rusty, would you start reading? Was there anything else over those first few verses? All right, then Rusty, would you read the next 6, 7 through 12?
Alrighty. Look at what is before your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ, so also are we. For even if I boast a little too much of our authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be ashamed. Gotta love not turning off your ringer. I do not want to appear to be frightening you with my letters, for they say his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is of no account. Let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding.
All right. So yeah, this passage is really telling about Paul's ministry, I think, in that he says about himself what his critics say about him, that he doesn't have much of a physical presence and that he doesn't have a real commanding voice. And you can even almost hear their criticism where they're like, yeah, he writes these big letters, but he doesn't have the physicality to back it up when he's present. And Paul says, yeah, I write these letters, but when I'm present, even though I don't have a real bold voice, even though I'm not physically intimidating, I'm not backing down from these positions. Yeah. Right? What I'm saying is right. What I'm saying is real. And so even though my bodily presence isn't great, don't mistake that from me lacking authority.
And back then, the communication was so different. I mean, we could send an email around the globe to address the situation now where, Paul had to write it because he couldn't go physically be present with the church at Corinth to deal with the conflict, because they always say when there's conflict, deal with it face to face.
Yeah.
If you can't, then make a phone call. But like when you put things in print, things can be misunderstood, and like, was he really meaning this or meaning that? And so it was just a very different way to communicate, I guess, in that culture.
Yeah.
But he was like, I'm gonna write it, but I'm not afraid to say it in person.
I'm not afraid to say it in person, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that, obviously, like, the fact that he put it in writing is why we still have it today. And so if, like, even though he probably would have liked to have traveled there, the fact that he couldn't, his hand was at work in it, because him not being able to travel, that means he puts it into writing, and so we have it as an example for us today. We learn from it today. And also, when you do a study, and we did a study on this a couple of years ago, like how we got the Bible. I can't remember if that was the exact name of the study, but something like how we got the Bible. It was a video series, and it just kind of talked about the different steps, not just in the printing and publishing, but going back how, letters were collected. And the fact that we have this letter from Paul, it says the people who received this letter from Paul, they took it, they copied it, and they distributed it, because they found in what Paul was saying such value that they wanted it to be known, not just to their churches, but to all of the churches. Like, they recognized its authority wasn't just based on his name, but in its value, its intrinsic value, what he was saying. And I think maybe one of the things that I overlooked in my first reading of it this morning is he has this, if anyone's in Christ, remind himself that just as he is in Christ, so are we. Mm-hmm. And it's always an important reminder for us that when we have conflict with someone, we have to be careful not to vilify that person, but to say, as much as I belong to Christ, they belong to Christ. And as much as you belong to Christ, so do I. And so it's like, when we're fighting, we need to be careful that we're fighting not as enemies but as brothers. Which sometimes brothers can fight just as fiercely as enemies, but I think maybe the one distinction is that when you're fighting your brother, there's a point you don't cross. And I know I've watched that with my boys. The other day, they were wrestling, and they wrestle and just fight all the time. And one of them actually hurt the other. And it was Dax that accidentally hurt Dutch. And Dutch was like, "Dax, I'm hurt." And just like that, it was like, stop everything. Let's make sure that he's okay. And, and it was just like, and I think that sometimes in church, we need to be able to love each other well enough and know each other well enough that we can fight, and at a certain point, or, I say fight, disagree, wrestle with things, and at a certain point say, that hurt me. And when you hear your brother say, that hurt me, to say, okay, let's stop everything and make sure that this brother is okay before we move forward with anything else, because ultimately it's our love that needs to shine through more than anything else.
Well, and I think that's the idea behind a fight. No one's really wanting to hurt the other.
Right.
But because you don't start off wanting to go fight someone, I don't think.
Yeah.
But as the disagreement happens and then, like, oh, I hurt you, then that
Exactly.
changes everything.
Yeah, and it's so much more productive in any disagreement, in any relationship, if you can begin at a point of love to say, listen, what I'm saying to you, I'm saying out of love, and I want the best for you. I want good things for you, as I know you want for me. And with that sort of as the ground rules, then let's kind of dig into this more. But all right, was there anything else in those verses?
Well, I just think, I wonder if we'd be disappointed in Paul's presence if we saw him.
Yeah, I wonder.
He
that.
puts so much weight in his words. And I've seen people that their appearance is very different than what they really are, than what they really say. And I think that you might see somebody that looks small and weakly that has a booming voice. It's just, you just never know. And I think we do sometimes let the appearance of someone, some can be very different than what they're really trying to say, or the power of their voice or their words.
Yeah, I went to seminary with a guy that he is a blogger, and he has a very popular Christian blog. He works for Lifeway. He's an editor there, and published a lot. And the first time, I had read his writing before I ever saw him, and then I saw him, and I was like, man, you're no bigger than a minute. Like, you're just this, like, I kind of want to, like, bend over and pet his head, but it was like, at the same time, though, it was like, I wouldn't dare, because I'm like, he is smart, he is articulate, he is, if I'd bent over and patted his head, he'd probably tear me apart with his words,
Well, the first time I saw Joel Gregory,
Yeah.
here's not a very big guy.
Oh, but that voice.
Glasses, but he just,
that
he had
voice.
a great voice, and he was a great preacher. So
Yeah.
it was.
It's kind of like the Ghost Rider and Elf.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's it. Same thing. Brad, would you read those last 6 verses of this chapter?
Verse 13?
Yeah, starting at 13.
But we will not boast beyond limits, but will boast only with regard to the area of influence God assigned to us, to reach even to you. For we are not overextending ourselves as though we did not reach you, for we were the first to come all the way to you with the gospel of Christ. We do not boast beyond limit in the labors of others, but our hope is that as your faith increases, our area of influence among you may be greatly enlarged, so that we may preach the gospel in lands beyond you without boasting of work already done in another's area of influence. Let the one who boasts in the Lord, for it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends.
All right. I'll just tell you this. These last 6 verses of this chapter are the hardest of this chapter for me personally, because being a pastor and going to conferences and conventions and even local missionary associational get-togethers, and Rusty and I have talked about this before, like, we encounter a lot of people, and and Rusty and I are not. In fact, Rusty and I were at a meeting not too long ago where some people were kind of talking about their giving and talking about how much of it was online, and these guys in the room were boasting about not just about giving, but kind of boasting about how technologically advanced they were, right? You remember this? Right at the
Trying to
beginning of the
recall it,
it's
yeah.
right at the beginning of the pandemic, and like, oh, we're so technologically advanced, and we get this percentage of this, and and Rusty and I were sitting there, and I was just like ours is double that. Like we are so far beyond what they're doing, and I was sitting there looking at Rusty, and I was like, are you gonna tell him? And he was like, and neither of us said anything about it except to say, this is the vendor that we use. They've been great to work with. They are as good as they say they are. You might look at them, but never were we like, we do, none of that. And it was just like, I get so put off by that attitude that seems haughty or boastful to me. And so when I read Paul talking about boasting in areas of influence and limits and borders and and it's just like this whole conversation, it's almost muted to me, because I'm just like, I've got no interest in boasting. Not only do I have no interest in boasting, but I have very little time for those who do. And at the same time, though, God chose this to go in there, right? And like he in God's infinite wisdom said, this needs to be in this chapter of this book, of this letter, and it needs to be preserved for 50 years so that it could be put into the canon of Scripture, and then preserved through translation after translation and printing after printing so that it's here with us today. God decided that this would be here. And so what then do we make of Paul and this, where he's like, we're going to sort of boast in this, but not in that. So what, as you guys read this and as you've studied this, what do you make of this sort of boundaries of boasting that he goes into? Maybe the question is, what are the things that are appropriate to boast in and what are not appropriate to boast in? So Brandon, as you think about, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
let's do this thing.
So as you think about, what do you find that, like maybe that you hear somebody else boast about something and you're like, you know what, that's fair. That's okay to be proud of that.
It's really interesting kind of going and visiting other churches and getting involved with other youth ministries and learning from people who've been doing this a lot longer than I have. Apart from, the influence I have from you guys. I remember one thing at Praise Jimmy was talking about where he's like, we make numbers a big deal because behind every number is a face, behind every face is a name, behind every name is a story. So we're going to make every single number important. And I was just like, because before then I was just like, you guys talk about numbers a lot and it doesn't really, I was like, this shouldn't be something we really talk about. But after he said that, I was just like, that really does make sense of why one more is important, why the one more is important. And so I think that kind of changed the way I looked at even kind of like how we take numbers, because y'all have heard me say before, it's just like, why do we worry about this? Why don't we waste our time on this? But behind every name is a story, and that's a story that we have to go out and seek. And it kind of changed the way of, like, they're not boasting about this. They're telling their students, hey, you are important to us. Like, we see you. So that's kind of what I think about, like, because boasting, it's super.
Yeah.
Well, in verse
Yeah.
15, his qualifier is, I want it to increase your faith, and so that our influence around you gets better. It was just like I was kind of bragging on Jason Fuller Sunday at First Baptist because he's a good friend and he's told me about what they were doing in family ministry, and I'm going, that's a great idea. It wasn't so much as to puff up another church in our town, but to say, hey, this is what we're doing to reach families. We went, hey, that's a great idea too, because just like Jason and I talked too, it's like our town's big enough for two churches, and you want two churches to be healthy, but you don't want just two. You want all the churches to be healthy as we, exercise our faith and to love people and to share the gospel. And And so you want to boast in those things and share the good, to me, things that would
Yeah.
encourage others.
And and having talked to Jimmy, and one of the things I like about him is that in talking about the numbers and viewing the numbers that way, it's that you can say, well, my Sunday school class only had 2 people this week, and that is as sinful a way of looking at numbers as boasting on big numbers, because again, those two numbers have faces and names and stories, and it's like we treat those numbers, we treat those people, and we recognize that each of those lives holds so much value and promise. And so, I think that's a good way to view the numbers. And so I guess in that sense that there is a certain sense of a boast in a number is okay when you're looking at the number as a unit of the gospel, not just a behind in a chair, right? And then and so what are there anything else that springs to mind as a inbounds kind of boast? So, I think maybe one of my things is, and I think all of us here in one way or another have learned from Andy Stanley, and one of his big things is he looks at percentages. Right, and when he talks about budgeting, we budget by percentages. In his personal budget, in his church budget, it's all about these kind of percentages. And one of the things that I like to do, like we just recently took up an offering for international missions, or no, home missions. Sorry, North American missions. They've changed the
regress.
terminology in my lifetime, and I can never remember which one's home, foreign, whatever. Anyway, so for North American missions, and it's like, we set aside this number of dollars, and it's like, okay, it's a number of dollars, but when you look at it as percentages, then I think it's okay to boast in that, I think, and so it's like, your family may not be able to give financially a huge number, which kind of takes us to that story of the widow with her 2 mites. It's like, but what about the percentage? Because if you're giving 1%, the rich person's 1% in number of dollars may be far more than the poor person's 10%. But that 10% to God, that's something that I think is an appropriate boast to say, we're faithful in our tithe. We are faithful in giving a gift over our tithe. Those sorts of things I think are okay. And again, it's not about the numbers. It's much more about the percentages and how the impact that it's having on your life, that sort of thing. So,
I think you can
passage it says God looks at the heart.
right, yeah, it becomes a hard issue.
I think you can kind of tell between like the wrong kind of boasting and like the boasting in the Lord that Paul's talking about. Like you can see it on the person.
Yeah.
If what they're actually if they're being legit,
Yeah,
Well, and even like look at even at verse 16, even beyond 15, it was like, I want your faith to be increased so that our power of influence is greater. But then verse 16 says, so that we could preach the gospel even in other lands. So it's even beyond the influence there. It's like it's the we're blessed to be a blessing to others. You're disciple this generation and this person so that it multiplies to the great beyond. It's so much bigger than the boast or the praise itself.
and so shifting gears just a little bit, I think maybe we talked about things that are appropriate boasts or within the bounds of boasting, and then I think there are some that are out. And this is the one that really drives me nuts, and I've probably referenced it before. It's not such a thing now, but a few years ago, hashtag blessed. Do you remember hashtag blessed? It was, man, hashtag blessed was everywhere on social media. You would go onto Facebook and somebody would get a new Cadillac, and you got a picture of them in front of the Escalade, and they're putting throwing up they're like, what money, and it's like hashtag blessed. It's like, come on, that you are not boasting in your blessing. Or maybe that's it. Maybe you're boasting in the blessing, but you're not boasting in the blesser.
Yeah.
You're not boasting in the one who is giving the blessing. And so I think maybe that's where I have to kind of draw this line with Paul, is that he is boasting in the God who has allowed him, who has empowered him enabled him to be able to have this ministry. And he's not boasting in the ministry itself. And I think that's where I sometimes, with preachers and anybody really, it can come across where it's like, you're boasting in yourself, where it's like, whereas, and you almost kind of have to hear someone's voice as they talk about it, which is maybe where if Paul was here and we were listening to him talking about the blessings of his ministry, we would get that sense from him. Whereas sometimes I'll hear people say, "Oh yeah, this many people come to the Lord, and God's expanding our borders constantly," and you're like, and it just kind of rubs you the wrong way. Whereas you hear somebody else and they're like, it's a John Piper line where he says that he has said, "God has made much of me, so I can make much of him." And it's like, yep. And Piper is one who, his ministry is so bizarre to me because he has this massive publishing ministry where John Piper's books are all over the place. And it's crazy to me that there are bookstores that sell John Piper's books, and at the same time you can go on his website and you can find everything he's ever written. Like every one of his books that's in print, you can find it on his website. You can print it off at home for the cost of ink. But he hasn't done it to enrich himself, but he's got millions of books sold. But if you go to his church, you'll see a couple hundred people, and it's just like so different. And also talking about the physical presence, you see him and he's just this really kind of small, diminutive man. His voice isn't particular, but God has used him and his writing ministry to such lengths. So anyway, are there anything else that really strikes you guys as you say, that's...
Well, I think it's easy for us to get caught up in boasting about our buildings and our people and about the things we're doing and all that kind of stuff. And I think, to me, it's kind of losing your focus. It takes us away from what we're really supposed to be about, and that is the preaching of the gospel, we just can find other things to boast in and kind of be satisfied in that.
Yeah.
Be proud of that. Maybe it's not so much boasting, but what are you proud of?
Yeah.
And but I think it's about focus here. We need to not let these things get in the way of us focusing on what we're supposed to be doing. So
Yeah, it is easy to boast in those things. And I'll say this for, as a boast on Rusty, he has never once bragged about his airplane. The Learjet that he has, he's never once been like, my G6 is,
That's the other dollar.
Oh, that's the other dollar that's a
Creflo,
preacher.
not
Sorry.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this dollar doesn't have a jet. But, if he did, he would not boast about it. So, all right. I think that probably covers that chapter pretty well. Did we have any questions come up? I don't think we did.
No, we had some chime-ins. I saw Tim Warner. He was the one that called me a while ago. So he said, "Oh yeah, I see you live." So
That's good.
Shout out to Tim if he's still hanging out.
Thanks, Tim. All right. Let's go through a couple of announcements before we go. Rusty, what have we got on the announcement front?
Today is Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo in celebration.
So
Our menu tonight
is something Mexican.
it's tacos.
I haven't been in there to see what Nat's cooking.
It's tacos. Nat is making tacos, soft tacos with ranchero beans, and I can't remember everything. Oh, sopapilla cheesecake. So that is worth it.
Yeah.
That is worth the trip right there. If you've not had sopapilla cheesecake, come tonight. Even if you just come and eat and leave, I will forgive it, because the sopapilla cheesecake is, it is worth some mercy and grace. So,
And I think for our teenagers too, Brandon, right? Are we doing just a taco bar upstairs for them? So
taco bar upstairs, nice.
So teenagers definitely want to come do that. And Sunday, something that's coming up a while ago, it's Mother's Day.
It
And so
is.
I did go put my card in the mail a while ago for my mom, and I just hope with the mail
Such
system
a
it gets
good
there.
son.
And I've not always remembered to get those cards in the mail on time, so I love my mom and dad, and my card sending abilities is not always indicative of that.
Is your friend still involved at Lifeway?
Yeah. he's still there.
They need to put a store. They need to open stores back, because ever since physical Lifeway closed down, it has been almost impossible to shop for my mom. I used to just go to Lifeway before Mother's Day or her birthday and just, this is good.
Yeah, this is good. This is nice. It has a verse on it. We'll put it out. Yeah, I haven't sent. My mom's probably listening right now. Don't look for a card in the mail. All right, you know me. You made me. So anyway, sorry.
But when he said that to me, hey, that's a good idea. Send a card.
That's a good idea. I should
was-
go get one today.
I've tried to overnight a card once before, and I still missed the deadline. So.
That's nice. No, there'll be an Amazon box, Mom. It's going to show up sometime in the next several days. So yeah, we'll just kind of go, or maybe I'll just have it shipped here, and you can get it when you come and visit. That'll be incentive for you to get here. So
Yeah, so that's Sunday, and I think next week we have like the blood drive and Beast Feast.
Yeah.
So
And you know what? We've got a kind of a limited audience here, but let me say one word about Mother's Day. We do a recognition here at Mother's Day, on Mother's Day, and I know that that it's a complicated issue for a lot of women, and that there are many women that would like to be mothers who are unable to, of their own physicality, able to be mothers. But we have seen firsthand women who have become mothers by adoption, through fostering, spiritual mothers. And so we recognize motherhood as being a more inclusive thing than just giving birth to a child. But at the same time, we want to recognize mothers. We don't want this opportunity to pass without taking a moment to recognize, because just as we recognize veterans on Veterans Day, it is a choice that women make that makes our world a better place. As veterans fight for our freedoms, mothers fight for our goodness, and so we want to recognize them, and yeah, so we will recognize them, and we don't want to alienate anyone with that recognition, but everyone has a mother, and I hope that you had a good one. And if you did, I hope that you will celebrate her. And I'll just say this, there's nothing that your mom wants more than for you to be in church on Sunday. So
Amen.
put that out there. Yeah, whether it's with her or not, be in church. Send your mom a picture of you in church on Sunday. That'll make her real happy.
and
So.
then be sure to hashtag it blessed.
And hashtag blessed.
Yes.
Blessed.
It's the worst. All right, what else have we got? We got a few more days left for registration for children, youth camp, junior high camp, and senior high camp, and Mission Arlington. Find those at nobcfamily.com.
There's a link on the homepage.
Link on the homepage now, so you can find those. And what else? Is that about it? Beast Feast is coming up next week, May 11th. You can still get tickets online. And
Yeah, big push. The big question was, what are they serving for food? Because last year it was like, oh, you can eat crawfish. This year it's pulled pork sliders.
pulled pork
And
sliders.
saw that and all the fixings
Solid.
that comes with the ticket. And tickets start at $10 all the way up to $40. It's just how close do you want to
Depends
get
on
to
how much
Phil
you wanna eat.
Robertson's beard.
Yeah, that's based on closeness, not on volume of food. So that's
Yes.
so you get the same food, $10 or $40. So
And it's open to the whole family. Don't have to be just a guy to go.
okay,
To Beast Feast.
so men and women as well.
And then give blood here Wednesday night in this gym.
Awesome, that'll be great. We'll be set up right over there. Make sure to save up your blood until next Wednesday night. So,
Save it.
all right, you got anything else?
We're good to go.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in with us, and hope you have enjoyed our little Bible study here. And if you have any other questions, or anybody watching this after the fact, post your questions in the comments, and we'll circle back to them at the beginning of next week. So have a great day.
All
Hopefully
right.
see you tonight.
See ya.